We go? Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and I salute the survivors of an extraordinary week. I'm very glad you're there. You make our lives, you give purpose to why we're here, and very glad to see your interest in water. This is the session on water in politics, and we plan to have, I'm sure, a very lively discussion. My name is Margaret Catley-Carlson, and I'm the chair of the Global Agenda Council in the World Economic Forum for Water. There's 68 of these, one is for water. And so therefore I've had the great pleasure of chairing that. It was set up because there's a number of companies that are very convinced of the growing importance, and you're going to hear from a couple of them today. Now, the premise of this session is that people in this room already know about the centrality of water to agriculture. They may have a pretty good idea that 2 billion people lack access to sanitation, 1 billion people lack access to clean water. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to take that as being known and being given, and we're going to talk about how to get water in a very positive way into the political level. How can we support the political level to get better public policy on water? Just about everybody agrees that since you can't create water, we've got about the same amount as was here with when the dinosaurs, or Julius Caesar, was roaming the planet. Same amount of water. We can't create it, but we can manage it better. And if we're managing it better, this does go back to public policy, and public policy goes back to the political level. So that's the part of the circle that we're going to be looking at today. And we have some very exciting people and very knowledgeable people to help us explore this issue of the dimension of water and politics. We have, I'm not sure, we have just coming down from where my left, we have Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, who is the chairman of the board of Nestlé Switzerland, and he's a member of the foundation board of the World Economic Forum. We have Peter Gleick, who is the president of the Pacific Institute in the USA. We have, now mine says Yaacob Ibrahim, but we don't. We have Kapil Sibal, who is the Minister of Science and Technology and Earth Sciences of India. And then we have Yaacob Ibrahim, who is the Minister of Environment and Water Resources of Singapore. And then we have Dick Evans, who is of Rio Tinto. Mine says United Kingdom. Do you, in fact, live in the United Kingdom?
I do not. I live in Canada.
Well, very good. Okay, there you are. That just shows you don't always trust your notes. So we're going to start off then by really exploring this issue of how public policy and how we can contribute positively to public policy. And I'm going to start with Peter Brabeck of Nestlé. Peter, Nestlé's involvement and championship of a better public policy role for water is quite understandable. You can't make any of your products without good water. If your watersheds aren't protected, your suppliers are in a difficult position. No water, none of your products. You've got a big workforce. If they don't have good water and they're sick, you've got problems. And your consumers have to be healthy enough to consume. So it's reasonable that you have taken a very leading role in this. But you've also said some things about the need for clear, transparent structures for allocating water within countries that promotes better government, possibly avoids the risk or reduces the risk of conflict. You've also said that countries have to work towards full cost recovery to make sure that the infrastructure for water stays financed. These things have ascending levels of sensitivity, but that one in particular, in many places, sets off a real political reaction. So tell us a little bit. You must talk to governments all the time. You must be engaged in a lot of dialogue. Tell us a little bit in a general way about your conversations at the political level when you try and bring in these basic elements of better water management.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you wouldn't be surprised. It is very seldom that when I approach governments, we talk about water spontaneously. And yet, water has entered the policy for many, many years, but it has entered the policy stage by the back door. Every government wants to talk about agricultural policy, agricultural subsidies, the European agricultural policy. The Doha round is all about agricultural policy. But what most governments have not realized in the past, that those agricultural policies are intimately linked to the water policies. But they have no idea. They have not understood that 1 calorie needs 1 liter of water. So we have a policy issue which is there, but the understanding of this link between agriculture, then newly biofuel, which is another policy issue, clear policy decision, is intimately linked with the water. And this is where the limitations are. So our task is, when we are talking, whether it's here or whether it's with government, is really to make them more aware of how water has to play a major role and consciously play a major role. If you're talking to the farmers, they will talk to you about water immediately. When we talk, and we had a long discussion with the farmers, I had a long discussion with the farmers in the Punjab, and they will talk to you about water, okay? Because they know what it means that the water level have gone down to 95 meters. Yeah? If you talk to the farmers in China, they know what we are talking about, because due to the Olympic Games, for 6 months, 3 million farmers didn't have access to water because they needed the water in order to fill up the Olympic basins. Yeah? They know what water is. But on government level, frankly speaking, I don't think we have this consciousness now. A last thing, that I know you want more than 3 minutes, the issue of the human rights. And you remember very well, when we talked the first time, when we brought the water subject to the World Economic Forum, we were heavily criticized and said, you want to privatize water, and water is a human right. Well, let me say again, water is a human right for the 5 liters of water that we need to drink and for the 20 liters of water which we need as a basic hygiene. This is a human right. But I don't think it's a human right to fill up the swimming pools, to water the golf carts and things like this with subsidized water. And we are not using, we're not talking about the water which is being used, this 5 liters. This is nothing. Over 70% of fresh water goes into agriculture, and 93% of total freshwater usage is in agriculture. So this has nothing to do with human rights. We respect the human right, but this is just a small part of it.
So are governments hearing you? I mean, do they say how very nice to have your views and do come back soon? Do they ever ask you for some help in making these things more acceptable?
Well, I must say, for example, yesterday evening I had the dinner with one of the central bankers, one of the most important central bankers of the world. And we talked in the evening. He said he was being asked what was the one thing he was taking away from Davos, what he had not known before. And it was the aspect of water and food crisis. So I think yes.
So you just keep going. Okay, very good. Well, Kapil Sibal, Minister of Science and Technology and Earth Sciences of India. This morning I went to an Indian breakfast and you were there and you were an extremely good orator, and I'm awfully sorry for all of you that I'm not going to give him as much time as he had to talk this morning because he had really interesting things to say. But, you know, India is not immune from the current crisis, but it's doing a lot better than a lot of other countries. It's just announced 8% growth last year. The agricultural yields are increasing. We all know about the technology and the industrial increases. But underneath this, there is a real issue about water. Overpumping in the Punjab, increased salinization of the coastal areas, heavy monsoon rains, sometimes 90% of the water falling in 5 days. One doesn't have the feeling that the government of India feels itself able really to tackle the enormity of these problems. Now, tell me that's a completely wrong perception, because as you can tell, I have a great deal of sympathy for India, but you know, are they really grappling with these huge issues?
Well, no perception, first of all, is either completely right or completely wrong.
That's a polite way of saying it.
Well, let me sort of address the issue up front. You must remember that 60% of our population lives in the rural areas. For them, agriculture sustains life, and water is at the heart of that. So any political system that seeks to grapple with the issue of water has to be confronted with 60% of the population. And because each of the states depend on water, and the distribution of water amongst the various states is not entirely equitable, any decision by the central government in respect of water, which is a state subject, has enormous political repercussions. So, in a sense, it's very difficult for the federal government or the Union of India to start dealing with the distribution issues of water within various state governments, because that leads to political upheavals. And therefore that ultimately has a huge impact on electoral politics in India. So in a sense, you're absolutely right that the central government is unwilling to be involved in an imbroglio in which it has to make public policy announcements on matters which are within the state government jurisdiction. That's point number one. But we can deal with it from an entirely different context. Talk about agriculture. Instead of starting to distribute water amongst people, you can, through science and technology, say, why should agriculture need that much of water? You can have now, through genetic engineering, seeds which will in fact allow you to grow as much rice or as much wheat as you want with 1/3 the quantity of water. So in a sense, what you can do is approach the problem entirely differently. Instead of saying, okay, this is the amount of water that you need and we're not going to give you more. And we've seen very difficult situations in India between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu and some of the other states, Maharashtra, and some of the other neighboring states. We don't want to get involved in that. But if we can find scientific solutions to allow less water to be used for greater levels of productivity, in a sense, through public policy, we're approaching that issue and trying to solve it. And that's the thing, way we want to go.
How long do you let these things just go on, though?
No, we are doing huge work in this. In fact, we are at the threshold of solving some of these problems. For example, let me just give you an example. It's something that I mentioned at breakfast. There are 400 million people who live along the coastline of India. It's almost the entire population of Europe. Now, we can give them access to clean drinking water by converting through low thermal technologies, not the reverse osmosis principle, convert seawater into clean drinking water and have systems in place. We already have demonstrated a 1 million litre plant. The next stage is the 10 million litre plant. And we can put them all along the coastline and convert it into drinking water. So you have SNT solutions to the politics of water.
That we'll have to quiz you on that. An Indian politician famously said, when I'm running for an election, I just wait for my opponent to say that he would price water. And then I never have to say anything else because he'll get defeated and I'll get elected. Is this a perennial in Indian politics? Are we ever going to move to the situation where the Indian population is going to be convinced of the value of maybe having better performing water systems in return for paying?
No, now there is a national policy in terms of water management. And the national policy says if you want to build a house, and many states have adopted it, if you want to build a house, you must have a water management system. I think there are 3 M's that will solve this problem: mapping, management, and maintenance. If you map your water, if you manage your water, and if you maintain it, I think you deal with the real problem of politics.
Well, Peter will ask you after how you maintain it if you don't have a pricing structure, but I'll leave that up to him to do. Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Peter Gleick, president of the Pacific Institute, looks at water from a scientific, policy, technology, all of them point of view. And every 2 years publishes one of the books that the world reads about what the current water issues are. This year's book, which has just come out, has talked about the peak water. And I think anybody in this room, anybody at this conference, would know by now what peak oil is about. Is peak water a concept that we can use to get a foot in the Prime Minister's door, to get the Central Committee to say, oh, we're nearing peak water, to really get the Cabinet focused on this issue? Is this a useful concept in elevating the political debate?
Thank you, Maggie. Well, first of all, it's wonderful to see how water has moved up the agenda, both the global agenda and the Davos agenda. It would be nice if it moved even higher and in a more integrated way, I think. Water is not just water. Water is energy. Water is ecosystem health. Water is all of the things we care about. And water is politics, as we've heard. The idea of peak water is the idea that there are limits. We're never going to run out of water. Water is a renewable resource, unlike oil. Although there are forms of water that are non-renewable, that actually the concept of peak oil, peak water are fairly similar. And frankly, what we see in parts of India, parts of Central California, in terms of non-sustainable use of groundwater, where groundwater levels drop, where we pump it faster than nature recharges it. That's peak water. We're going to run out of sustainably available water in some places. The other issue associated with peak water that one might think about is, in a sense, peak ecological water. The ability of humans to take water, ever more water, if you will, from rivers and lakes and groundwater to permit ever more economic production, grow more food, produce more widgets, produce more economic value, runs against the conflict that the more water we take hurts the environment. And eventually, the increase in economic benefit you get from taking more water comes up against the increase in ecological damage you cause from taking more water.
I'm not sure I've got you into the Prime Minister's office with this argument.
And we run out of available water. It's the constraints that the politicians are seeing are partly economic, partly physical, and partly environmental. And unless the politicians, to get to their offices, understand how to integrate these issues, we're not going to solve them. We're not going to solve them without proper pricing in the agricultural sector. We're not going to solve them with desalination. You can't tell the Prime Minister all you have to do is desalinate, in my opinion. You're not going to solve them unless you address the social issues as well. And so ultimately, the way to think about water is really in an integrated way. And I'm not convinced we're doing that yet. And I'm not convinced that that's where we've yet reached. And maybe that's where we can explore further.
So the way you're getting in the Prime Minister's office is to say, look, there's very real constraints, and you're nudging up against these constraints, and they're going to cause you real problems, economic, of social nature?
Well, first of all, it's the Prime Minister's office and it's the CEO's office as well. There are serious risks associated with water for the business community, which I think Davos has tackled to some degree. The solutions that you have to bring to the Prime Minister, I don't know if you have to argue that water is a real problem in many parts of the world. I think India knows that water is a problem. The government of Singapore has addressed this directly. The government of the United States, to some degree, is dealing with this. But the answers are political, they're economic, they're technological, and they're social. They're also not just the Prime Minister, to be honest, Maggie. Water's an international issue because it crosses borders. Mm-hmm. It's a national issue that prime ministers and presidents have to deal with, but it's also a local issue. The politics of water ultimately has got to be addressed at all of those levels.
Okay. Now you talked about integrated, you talked about getting something done, and of course one of the places in the world that has done this is Singapore. Not only have they brought on something called New Water, which you'll probably hear about, not only have they really done some effective things about source protection and some very innovative things about getting public acceptability, they've actually managed to reduce the demand for water through conservation. Now, this is fantastic, and the problem is that when you say this to people, I forgot, they've also reduced municipal leaks very impressively. When you say this to people, they say, well, yes, but that's Singapore, isn't it? If we could just clone Lee Kuan Yew and give everybody a Lee Kuan Yew and their national background, that you could start to solve these issues. So I'm going to ask you a really unfair question, which is saying, okay, you've done these extraordinary things, and also because you've reflected on it, some of the lessons learned. How would you pass on those lessons learned to the states in your region? What are the main lessons learned that could be transmissible to energizing the political system to do some of the extraordinary things that Singapore has done? Always given that you're a nation state, a city state, you're rich, which you don't acknowledge, but always given those things, what are the lessons?
Well, thank you, Margaret, for posing those unfair questions to me. But really, I think the lessons that we have learned have been spoken by the gentleman before me, that we have to get the political will from the top. So we don't have to impress upon the Prime Minister. He himself took upon himself to see the water problem from day one when he became Prime Minister. And I think that is, to me, the most important learning point, that there was political will from the top to see through, to find a sustainable and reliable source of water for Singapore. It requires integrated management. It requires the various agencies to work together. And at the end of the day, it's really to getting the community to adopt water conservation habits from day one. Don't forget, in the 1960s, we had water rationing. There was a time when our reservoirs were really very dry, and we have to impose water rationing. And so for the older generation, they remember what water was it like. I remember as a boy having to go to the distant pipe to get water early in the morning, because by noon, the water will be shut down. So these are lessons that we have learned, and we hope that future generations do not have to learn, and we hope that people in the region also do not have to learn, because really, as mentioned by Peter, there is sufficient water, but it's about managing it, maintaining it, and putting it in an integrated manner where all sectors of the economy will receive their fair share of water. But on top of that, being wasteful is something in which we are very, very concerned about. And therefore, from day one, we started the whole idea of water conservation. But as Peter rightly mentioned, we had to do the political part, which was to price water correctly. So water is not subsidized in Singapore. Everybody pay their fair share. On top of that, we have a water conservation tax, which we impose. If you use water beyond 40 cubic meters a month, you pay a certain amount of tax. If you're below 40 cubic meters, you pay a smaller amount of tax. So the message was very clear from day one that water is a strategic resource. You cannot be wasteful. But on the part of the government, we have to make sure that we put in place a system that is reliable and sustainable. So you're right, our leaks are way below 5%, but through a lot of hard work to make sure that we can monitor, detect, and then repair. So these are the lessons that I think we can share with countries across the region, but ultimately I think political will is the most important thing. From then on, flow of governance and proper structures that are in place to ensure that people appreciate water as a strategic resource.
Minister Sibal, that's not a message that will work in India at this stage?
No, it certainly is. I mean, but the question is that it's very difficult to put a policy in place in India in that context. It's, for a small country like Singapore, it's all right to say, let's price water. You know, think of pricing water in India where 60% of the people are involved, 600 million people who live at subsistence level. Remember, within the rural sector, 60% of the rural sector lives at subsistence level. And then where are they going to pay their taxes from? If you start pricing, we don't even tax agricultural produce and agricultural income. Forget about taxing water. So it's a deep, very, very important political issue. I don't think any country, at least India, can afford to start taxing water or pricing water within the agricultural community. Therefore, I said the problem cannot be solved technologically. Certainly, it cannot be. I mean, it has a social dimension, it has a political dimension, but certainly technology can help in moving forward in a positive way.
People that have studied this would come back and say, you're hiding behind the poor 60%. You're hiding behind them to avoid what you should be doing with the other 40% that could afford to pay. And in fact, most studies show that poor people would be willing to pay at least a little bit of water to get better supplies.
Well, let me take you an example. Take Mexico City. If you go to Mexico City, and the higher you live, the more difficult it is for water to reach there. And if the poor people end up paying the most.
Yes.
And it's a big political issue. And this is what's going to happen in India if you start. The other people are willing to pay. There's no question about that. And there are municipal taxes which include, the cost of supplying water. But to tax water is not an easy issue.
Nobody said it was easy. Singapore says it's indispensable. This is quite
For
interesting.
1.1 billion people, it's really not an easy issue.
Yes, okay, good. Well, we'll come back to it, I'm sure, on this, because Peter Brabeck has said, that this is one of the ne plus ultra of getting a good water system. Dick Evans, you are with Rio Tinto. Probably most people in this room have never even thought about the water that a mining sector uses. It often causes location decisions. It often is the determinant factor about whether a mine stays in a place. Mining and processing the mining products uses an enormous amount of water. There's a question of quality and quantity, and sometimes you find that the neighboring communities beside the mine don't have enough water. So this means before you even start, you're right in the middle of a political issue simply by your decision to locate there and simply by the nature of your industry. And you have a real large vested interest in the allocation of water, urban, energy, industry, agriculture, etc. Good water management regimes will attract your investment capital. But when you have these location decisions with the political level, when you have your constant discussions on everything from taxation to resource usage to better roads and all the rest of it, How much push can you give to the need to get these in terms of water? And what have you done as a company to try and improve the water political climate?
I guess, first of all, Maggie, to confirm, it is essential in mining. And to put some numbers on it, mining uses about 2% of the world's water and recycles about 50% of it. So you can see there's obviously room for further improvement in that regard. But in many places around the world, and particularly in this recent past shortage of commodities, water was limiting the development of mines. Two well-known cases are the oil sands in Canada and the copper mines in Chile. And I do think that much of those limitations does come down to the politics of water. And in my view, there are two major political problems with water. One is a lack of effective and consistent market mechanisms, which comes back to the issue of price and allocation. And the second is that in many places where we operate, it's not going to one jurisdiction to get approval or to negotiate an agreement. It is going to multiple jurisdictions, which could be interstate or intercountry. It's going to multiple communities, and then it's going to a whole plethora of interest groups or other constituencies that have a claim on the water upstream or downstream. So to navigate the political minefield of trying to get approval for usage of water is very time-consuming and quite difficult. Now, how do you deal with that? When we approach governments and communities, I think there's only one way to deal with it, and that is that you have to involve the different constituencies early in the process, number one, and you have to find solutions that are win-win. It is unthinkable to build a copper mine and starve the community next door of water. You would never last. So what we look for are solutions where we can help perhaps make water more accessible and available to the communities in which we operate, where we can use water efficiently and maybe help the communities use water efficiently, because in many cases they are not using it efficiently. And as far as what we're doing beyond our own projects, we're very proud that Rio Tinto, through now part of its overall enterprise through Alcan, was a founder with the Swiss Development Agency of the WEF Water Initiative, which is precisely geared toward trying to find models that work effectively on engagement and coming up with these win-win solutions.
Thank you very much. Two of the instruments, this is the commercial. You heard about the WEF Water Initiative. If you don't know enough about the things that are being talked about at this session and you'd like to know more, this is the World Economic Forum Water Initiative, and it talks about many facets of water management, and this one I'm equally proud of, and that's the energy vision about water, because the energy people have now started to look at how much water it takes to create energy. Peter Gleick would say they're not looking enough yet at how much energy goes into producing different kinds of water, and that's also true. But at least we're getting a start of raising the sensitization about these things. And as I say, this panel's about the political level, but if you're interested in these things, get yourself one of these publications. Peter Brabeck, have you had successes in trying to get across these messages at the political level?
Well, I think the fact that we have today a plenary session on this subject, I think already shows you that I think we have been able to elevate the subject to the right level. If we would have some prime minister sitting here, and one day I think we will have them sitting here talking it, then I think we will have brought it to the right level. I think we are still on the level of creating the consciousness. In the meantime, we continue doing things which I think are wrong. Now, we do that wrong, again, for political reasons. Let me just give you one idea. I mean, we are pushing, and all governments, and continue, by the way, pushing the issue of biofuel. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm just coming back from Saudi Arabia. Desalination. Desalination, very important. They use desalination in order to have water for the irrigation, also for their wheat production, and this has helped them to become a wheat exporter. Now, guess what? Saudi Arabia had taken a decision they will stop producing wheat, and they will start to import wheat because they realize that the relationship on the caloric cost that you have between, on the one hand, producing water, and you need, and I have now the exact figures, you need about 4 liters of oil to produce 1,000 liters of water. Okay? But you need 9,200 liters of water to produce 1 liter of biodiesel. Now you can go to any primary school and ask the children if this works out. It doesn't work out, okay? But governments continue with the same policy. I give you more. Between fuel and food, we have the same measurement. The measurement is 1 calorie. It's an energy measurement. And it's exactly the same for food calorie or for an energy calorie. Now, the fuel, the energy market, is 20 times in calorie the food market. Okay? That means if you want to replace 6% of the fuel market with food product, you have to double food production. Now, what are our politicians telling us? In Europe, in the United States, in Latin America, even in China, even in India, they're telling us we should be replacing 20%. In Europe, it's 10%, in the US, it's 20% of our energy by biofuel. Now, you know, this means we would have triple and quadruple the food production when we have today already scarcity of water. We don't know where we would get this water. I mean, this is so simple.
Minister Sibal, is it simple? I mean, this morning we were talking about Catley-Carlson and has biofuels in his constituency, and yet India is a water short and sometimes not a food short anymore. But is it really this simple? Is it a good idea?
I think it's simple, and I think we're aware of this problem, and that's why we've not gone the route, the corn route, and not gone the route that Brazil has gone. We've not accepted that proposition. In sugar, for example, we only create energy out of molasses. We don't create energy out of anything else. And we're looking actually at the husk of wheat and the husk of rice to create energy. Right? So the waste material is to be used. Jatropha is a plant which is grown in arid regions, so it needs no water or very little water. And so our energy route is entirely different. We're not going to replace food with biofuels because that's the most uneconomic way of moving forward. So we're cognizant of this fact, and our policy decisions are in place as far as that is concerned.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Yes. Okay. Peter Gleick, you look like you want to say something about this.
Water's not simple. If water was simple, there wouldn't still be 1 billion people without access to safe water. The technology's available, the money's available. It's not that much money, but we haven't done it. And we haven't done it because of the politics of water, because of the way water crosses boundaries, political boundaries, economic boundaries, social boundaries, because of problems with governance, because of problems with corruption. Water isn't simple. And the biofuels example is an excellent one, where by failing to think about water when we were thinking about solving a carbon problem or a climate problem, we cause a food problem. It's the failure to integrate water and ecosystems and energy and climate together, and the failure to integrate politics and economics and technology together that has led us to the fact that we're in a situation that's unsustainable from a water point of view. So there are simple solutions, but the problem as a whole isn't simple. And rethinking the solutions, moving away from the assumption that we can find new supply for everything. In the 20th century, it was build another dam, build another long aqueduct, drill another groundwater well. It was supply. Well, we're running up against limits of supply. That's a physical reality. It's renewable resource, but it's a limited resource. But we have failed to think about demand, about how to do the things we want to do, which take water, with less water. How to grow more food with less water, which may require pricing. I'm sorry. Even if water's a human right, which I believe very strongly, and you give it to people who can't afford to pay it, you have to price it properly to get proper management. And there are ways to work around those two problems.
Dr. Yaacob, how did you convince Singaporeans that consuming less water was good for them, welcome, and by the way, you can pay more for it too? Now, this is persuasion of a tall order. How did you do that?
a lot of public engagement. We decided from day one that we have to go down to the constituency.
What does that mean? You made speeches?
No, we actually get our officials to go down to the ground, meet with the constituents.
Out of their offices?
Yes, from the PUB to go down, meet them, talk to them, engage them, understand their concerns, and work with them to find solutions. Simple solutions in which they can reduce their water consumption by fitting the timbals into their faucets, changing their shower heads. And we do this for free, by the way, because we see this as a national interest. And we've been very successful that we've been able to cut back our consumption for domestic water from about 170 10 years ago to about 154, 156 today liters per person per day. But it requires a lot of effort, and the effort has to continue. Moving forward, we're even looking now into mandating labeling of some water appliances so that at the end of the day, what comes into Singapore are more water efficient appliances so that people don't overconsume. This will require time. We have to work with industries, we have to work with suppliers, but we are going to mandate it for things like washing machines and flushing toilets and what have you. And this will go on as we continue to engage the community. The other sector that we are looking at now, of course, is the non-domestic sector, which is the industry. As you know, Singapore has a large petrochemical wafer fab. And we are also working with them. We've recently launched what we call a 10% challenge to cut back their water consumption by 10%. And we have some initial successes so that we work together with the companies to find ways in which they can reduce their water consumption.
Do polluters pay in Singapore?
Polluters?
Oh, sorry, you don't know about polluters? If somebody pollutes water in Singapore?
Well, if they litter, whether it's in the water or on the ground, they do have to pay. There's a penalty for littering in Singapore. But we work very closely with Singaporeans in terms of how they should also treat water and our water assets. We are now opening
So industrial pollution just isn't allowed? It isn't that you pay
It's
for
not
it?
allowed. You can't dump into
allowed.
any of our water bodies. There are strict standards about water pollution and what have you. So we work very closely with the industries and we engage them. So for example, there are some industries whereby they cannot even discharge their used water into our sewers. They have to treat it and they discharge into the sea based on international standards.
I have one comment. Dick, you get more political clout in numbers. Has the Mining Association, because you've got a couple of effective global associations, have you ever tried as an association to try and set out what elements would create better public policy regarding the mining sector? Have you ever worked on that?
Well, one thing that the International Aluminium Institute has done is to identify 18 key sustainability indices, which include water. And then to have all members report against that on a voluntary basis, but we get very high compliance, and then the data is fed back on a blind basis to individual companies so they can benchmark themselves. And that information is available publicly. The Mining International, ICMM, International Mining Organization, is looking at adopting a very similar kind of practice to have some metrics there in place. So that's a technique, I think, in a way to sort of encourage all of our members, and even the new entrants coming from China and Russia and Brazil and elsewhere, to see where they stand and to be aware of how they stack up on some of these metrics. I would like to make one other comment, if I could, on Peter's point on the interrelationship between energy, food, and water. And that is, I think any mathematician knows you cannot optimize a whole complex system if you have major parts of it missing. We have pricing for energy. We have pricing for food. We have pricing for fertilizer. We do not have pricing for water. And you cannot optimize a system, I do not think, unless you have all the components. And therefore, you're going to get these distortions, these large distortions, if politically you continue to artificially and markedly suppress or enhance prices.
Okay. Now, we'll go and ask you how you're reacting to all of this. Yes, Peter, you may. Let me give a little invocation here first, and then I'll come back to you while people are thinking about it. Okay. I think I see somebody holding a microphone up. I didn't know whether we were having a cards or a microphone system. So think of your questions, and then we'll raise the house lights, please, and we'll have a few questions from the floor. But in the meantime, back to you, Peter.
No, I was just, when I listened to that, I was just thinking, what happened over the last couple of days? How many presidents and prime ministers have been sitting here, how many central bankers, And what did they tell us? They told us that they are going to spend billions, not 1 billion, hundreds and trillions into the economy. I've heard about spending into CO2, I've heard spending into airports, I've heard spending into roads, I've heard spending I don't know into what. I haven't heard one. I was just reflecting. I haven't heard one saying we are going to take this opportunity in order to invest in the infrastructure for water. Have you heard one?
Yes, China is.
Well, and in the U.S. stimulus package, there's probably $100 billion for water infrastructure. It may not be the right water infrastructure.
It's not redesigned systems, but it is at least water infrastructure.
I mean, it's not 30 million efficient washing machines or toilets.
Yeah.
But I
It may
think
be
we
the
should
old
make
style.
a strong claim
Yeah.
and a message to them that this is a real opportunity.
This is the opportunity,
That's the
exactly.
opportunity.
Yeah, but your entire debate on global warming and the meeting that's going to take place in December, water is an essential part, and we're looking at water and our resources within the country to see how we can preserve them and maintain them. So I think that it is part of that global warming debate as well, apart from anything else.
Well, I went to all the sessions I could on the post-carbon economy and on climate change, and the only water in the session was that which passed the speaker's lips. And, I got very cheered by some of the contents, but it was water deficient, let me tell you, in terms of the thinking there. Could we have some house lights, please? I don't know if I'm talking to anybody or whether... Maybe there's nobody out there and they just don't want us to know this.
The staff's
Okay,
gone
we'll
home.
have to have a question in the dark while we find somebody who might know where the house lights are. Yes, please. I see a form over there. Please, you have the floor.
First of all, thank you for having this panel. I think it's really important to bring the attention to water. I also think...
You identify yourself, please?
Jerry Steiner with Monsanto.
Hi.
I also think your opening PowerPoint or whatever the slideshow is at the beginning is really very good, and I hope you'll send it out to a lot of people because I think it raises a lot of awareness. I guess I have more of a request than a question in the last half of it, and that is I think when we talk about water in crops, we have to get more specific. And that is because, but take a look, for example, at the use of corn. 83% of corn in the U.S. is not irrigated. But we're talking about all of these crops as if they're all the same. And I think rainwater is really very different than withdrawing water from a river or deep right here. And we're missing the opportunity to really point out the importance of getting more productivity out of non-irrigated agriculture around the world. We have a lot of talks about adding irrigation to help meet the double of food need. And I think we also need to talk about how we get more out of rain.
Well, I certainly agree with you on the rain-fed. One figure that you might like to take away from here, which will be useful at cocktail parties, is there's 800 million cars and 800 million malnourished people in the world. And so therefore, when you start talking about biofuels, you need to really have an idea of what is at play there. And Jerry has just reminded us of one of the things, that not all things are equal to all others, and there's some sensitivities in there. Okay, other questions? Yes. Identify yourself, please. Oh, sorry. Did anybody want to comment on that biofuels issue?
I just wanted to mention one thing, and he's absolutely right, that we have not been able to really have public policy on the kinds of water. And he's talking about that, namely your aquifers, which are there for centuries. We're depleting them. Actually, we're using 160 billion tons of water as a community, as a global community. We consume 160 billion tons of water, more than we replenish on an annual basis. Which in real terms is if you have a convoy of trucks with water, it'll go around 35 times the circumference of the earth. That's the amount of water the global community is consuming, more than it's replenished by nature. And
so how do we get that dialogue going in India?
That's where public policy comes in. That's where you reach out to people, you start talking to people, saying what an important resource is it. And this is a resource which is not diminishing and depleting, it's being polluted. And we need to actually get that message across to people.
Could you have a national dialogue on that in India?
Yes, very much so, very much so.
Out loud?
Yes, absolutely.
Good.
We're willing
Good.
to do that. Yes.
Yes.
Dennis Snower, I'm president of the Kiel Institute of the World Economy. One thing that really strikes me in this assembly as well as in others is that the message comes across that here's a problem that we can solve and it hasn't been solved. And there's very little analysis as to how to overcome the obstacles to solving it. Now, one big obstacle that needs to be addressed in the water problem, as with climate change, as with poverty, is the question of how to deal with interest groups. It's interest groups that are responsible for biofuels policy that is not in the public interest, interest groups that are responsible for a lot of things that have gone astray in water policy. So my question to the entire panel is, what are your thoughts on how to provide backbone for government, not only to deal with interest groups, but also to help compensate the losers of a policy that is clearly in the public interest? Really important question. Who wants to take that on? Yes.
Let me start it off, and I'm sure others can improve on it considerably. But Dennis, knowing the Global Economic Symposium that you had and knowing the group of practice there, I think one thing that is sadly lacking in this area is sort of an objective assessment as to who the winners and losers are and what the pricing could be and should be. Because if it gets propagated by one interest group or another, whether it's agriculture or mining or developing countries or developed countries, it always has a political bias. You have an organization that you bring together annually that has some of the best economics minds on the globe. Why not make this a challenge to that group to come out with a white paper that really, from a pure economic standpoint, deals with this, and then let the politicians deal with some of the facts to start from, as opposed to starting from emotion. Because if you start from emotion, you're always juxtaposed to each other, and you're never going to get to a win-win solution.
Okay, who else might want to take on interest groups?
Well, I think...
I mean, you are one, in one sense.
Of course.
And we're trying to make sure that stays positive.
No, but I think the aspect about this pricing, of course, is the most emotional one, and we have seen it's a politically most difficult one. And yet, interesting enough, there are many politicians, for example, in Africa, who said we need to have a price for water because otherwise the poorest are paying the highest price for the water, which we were saying before. So if you subsidize the water, so the richest can fill up and come back to the swimming pools, the poorest have to walk 6 hours to go to the next fountain in order to get a cube of water and have to pay for it. I mean, so there is an understanding price necessary. The problem is, and I think it was in the first question, water is not water is not water. Okay? And 1 liter of water in Switzerland is not 1 liter of water in the Sahel and or in China. And therefore, there is no global solution. In CO2, if we do not emit 1 kilo of CO2 in Switzerland today, we have had a positive impact. If we are using 1 liter of water less in Switzerland, we don't have a positive impact in the Sahel. So therefore, the problem of water is a local problem. It is reflected what was said by the minister before. That's why the Indian central government doesn't dare to touch it, because it's so highly local. And therefore, the solution will only come from a local one. We have to go to water basins, we have to go to nations, and we have to go even to villages. And what we are doing and what we are trying to do, and with the help of most of us who are sitting here, through the global agenda of the World Economic Forum and together with McKinsey, is working out an instrument which is basically like the Abutment curve which has been used in the CO2 point, which then we can give to the local authorities, to the national governments, as a tool in order to allow them to apply this tool for their specific situation. I think this is the next step, the most important step that we have to do. We will not be able to find a solution for all over the world here in Davos. But yes, I think we can and we have to find tools which allows them on the local level to take out the emotion and bring this back into something which can be, like you were saying before, your 3M. And we have to provide the tools for that.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes, got one over there.
Huguette Labelle, Transparency International. Dick, you were talking about the importance of factual information for politicians, for policymakers, to start from a base, a common base. I wonder if members of the panel could extend that to the people, because politicians very often react to the demand. And the demand comes from the population. And I know there's a number of things happening here, but how can we really get into a next generation of information, facts in the way that the people understand, and using it in the school system and using media and so on to really get people to better understand what's lying ahead, unless there's a different way of consuming and unless one tries to keep the industries as well as the policies in keeping with what we're looking for.
Thank you. Huguette Labelle is the chair of Transparency International, and last year they published a Water Integrity Network report that estimated that as much as 30% of the money that goes into water, or at least that lack of integrity or corruption costs as much as 30%. Right up and down the line in terms of water delivery around the world. Now, when you look at a world which so many people don't have water, 30% of a distorted amount, it really makes a tremendous difference. So how do you get it down to the people? That's the question. She posed it to you, Dick.
Yeah. Well, I think it's how do you get relevant information to the people? And it is a challenge, and I think it's a challenge like climate change in the sense that the effects, the negative effects, are not immediately felt in most cases. Now, if you lived in California and went through a water crisis and had to ration your showering, for most Westerners, something like an experience like that causes you then to think about water for a few years, but then it gradually wears off. And I think another aspect of water that nobody's touched on here is that water supply is not a steady state condition. I mean, we know there are droughts and there are high variability. So water is inherently a crisis prone or a crisis friendly issue. I mean, you're always going to have water crises because of the variability in the water supply. And most of what's been done around water, publicizing it is subsistence living people having to carry water 5 miles. And I mean, it's a very powerful message, but we've seen that message many times. And I think it's lost some of its effectiveness to the people who have to make decisions and take actions. And I think part of the key here is raising the awareness with those who have the resources, who run the companies, who have the infrastructure, who have the government agencies to actually make meaningful decisions. And therefore, I think what you have to look at is what's most relevant to them, i.e., what will it mean to your state, your province, your electability if you don't solve the water problem and you have a drought. So I think that's part of the key here is somehow transforming this into a greater immediacy by identifying the economic cost, the political cost to those who need to be motivated to act.
Yeah, Margaret, I think what Peter mentioned was really most relevant. What we need to do is look at this from a really local standpoint and from the state. What are the river basins in a particular state? What is the municipality using? What is the extent of water table they are using? What is the amount of water they are consuming? And then you put a cost to that. And then maybe you can find some solutions. But that information is not available. That's why I said the first thing we need to do is map. Because unless that information is available and that data is disseminated to the public at large, at least the community that is using it, we're not going to get any solutions and no real big-time public policy decision-making.
Would it help in India, do you think, if an organization like the Confederation of Indian Industries had regional meetings on this issue?
Oh, absolutely.
And so this would be a good thing to do?
A very good thing to do. I think we need to move forward because ultimately there has to be a cost for every drop.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not alone as a multi-stakeholder operation.
Yes.
And put out water facts. I mean, would this buttress things, or would everybody say, the reason they're doing that is they want more of our water?
No. I think the information is not in the public domain to the extent that it should be. And once we have the data, we can disseminate that information and then get a real dialogue and debate started.
Okay, yes.
No, I think we have very good examples. We're always saying one of the most beautiful examples is on Oman, certainly a country which really appreciates water. For 4,500 years, they have a water system where the community is responsible to build the water channels. Everybody, it comes from the good old time, everybody who is a traveler has a right to drink the water free of charge. Then the water goes into the mosque and to the school, so it goes to the public. It's free for the school, so the children have and the prayers get free of charge. And from then onwards, the water has a price. And this water price is being auctioned every week to the farmers. Now, if I'm a farmer, I buy 100 cubic meter of water, I have an interest to use it in the most efficient way, because if I only use 80, I can sell 20 on the open market price. Okay? I mean, that's a fantastic system. It covers the human rights aspect, okay? Because the drinking one is free. It covers, in this case, the responsibility of the religion, which in this case very important, that they have water for the cleaning in order to be able to pray, so the community part. It covers the children in order to have for the school. This is all free, and the rest is being paid. Well, that's a very simple system, 4,500 years old. Okay? Those systems we have to analyze, and then afterwards to try to apply to the local level. And by the way, the same system, with the exception of the mosque, is being used in Switzerland in the Valais since 1,500 years. Exactly the same system. So we have water systems which are working in this sense. All of them are based upon a fair price.
Aha. Okay. Anybody got a burning question? Otherwise, I think one more burning question over there. Okay. Burn away, but briefly.
Ken Hirsch with NGP Energy Capital Management, an energy private equity firm. Quick question about desalination. My impression is that that is an energy problem, not a technology problem. If energy were cheap and clean, is there a problem? Help me with other issues in desal besides energy and emissions.
Minister Yaacob?
Yeah.
And then Peter.
That's true. One of our sources of water is a desal plant. Small, is on the western part of the island. We have to try it out to understand it because we never have desalination before. But this is based on reverse osmosis using membrane technology. We are now looking into how we can actually halve the energy consumption needed to produce 1 liter of water. We have a research project going on with Siemens in Singapore to understand this better. So even though it is costly, but it's not the entire supply of drinking water to Singapore. It's only about 30 million gallons per day. It's only about 10%. But we want to understand the technology, how we can actually fit for our own circumstances, and at the same time reduce the energy consumption as much as possible. So it is a concern for us. So we're not about to build another one until we understand how we can actually reduce the energy consumption. There is a research project going on at this point in time.
I just want to mention that low thermal desalination technologies don't have the energy problem that reverse osmosis does.
Yes. We are looking into that also, by the way.
Okay. Peter, you've written a lot about desal, saying this may not be the automatic
Just 2 quick points. One is there will always be an energy cost to desalination. It's just an energy-intensive process no matter how good the technology is. And it's a capital-intensive process. So it will be expensive. That means that we will see more and more desal for high-valued industrial, coastal, urban uses. I'm convinced of that. We'll see more and more of it. But it's only one piece of the problem. The water problem is much bigger than satisfying high-valued coastal industrial uses. It's also agricultural efficiency, producing food, and desal will never provide cheap enough water for agriculture, except perhaps some extraordinarily high-valued agriculture. And it's not going to meet the basic human need challenge as well. So it's an important piece of the problem, but as is said over and over again, don't think about these things as silver bullet solutions.
Well, I see a lot of head nodding, so we ended the debate on an issue that everybody agreed with. So this is interesting, but not the total answer. I think we agreed that this is difficult. We listened and we differed slightly, but we agreed that getting this onto the political debate was fairly fraught, unless you happen to have a Sultan of Oman or a Lee Kuan Yew in your background, both of which are tremendously useful in promoting really good models that will work, or Swiss, that'll do. We agreed that moving to better models was very difficult when you've got a bunch of on-the-ground problems. We completely failed to agree on the essential nature or otherwise of pricing. as a nunc plus ultra of getting real solutions, but that gives us something to come back to on another day. So make sure you come back and join us when we do that debate on another day, and join with me, please, in thanking the panel.